Welcome back. You're watching Australian Agenda live from Parliament House. And I'm joined now, they're in the right spot for me, just not for you, the viewer. On my left, your right, unusually, we've got Get Up, Simon Shake. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
And on my right, from the Institute of Public Affairs, Tim Wilson. Thanks for your company.
Good morning.
Now, you guys regularly debate each other on Sky News, but I'll just offer you a Tim Tam.
Mate, it's a bit early in the morning.
Well, we'll get you eating it, but Tim Tams...
Mate, under a carbon tax, I'm not going to be able to afford the taste of a Tim Tam.
Well, then grab it now while you can.
I just say here, I was hoping that these would go up by more so that I would have a disincentive to eat them, but as we've seen this morning, it'll be a negligible price impact.
Very good point. Negligible price impact. Disincentive not there. Isn't that one of the problems when you have this amount of compensation for a carbon tax?
Well, you've got to look to the point of a price on carbon pollution. This is not about Australian households changing the light bulb. We've already done that. This is about big business cleaning up their act. It's about finally trying to price pollution as part of one of their costs that they incur.
So how does this do that, in your view?
Well, it depends on the details we see today, but the way the basics work, of course, is that big polluters will be asked to pay a cost for each tonne of carbon pollution they emit. That will provide an incentive to them to invest in cleaning up their act. We know that in a market economy, when a price goes up, you respond. A business responds by saying, can I invest in clean energy? Can I clean up my production methods so that I pollute less? And it's that reason that this idea that all of the prices will be passed on is ridiculous. That's why the cost impact on the householder is so little.
Well, let me ask you, Tim, I mean, what is a director of the IPA, a free market think tank, doing opposing a market mechanism like a carbon tax leading to an ETS?
Well, we support free markets, not market-based. Market is a technology. What it is simply putting out a technology of the way we're going to distribute the pain of a carbon tax. And take you right back to the question you asked before of Mark Dreyfus. I can tell you exactly how much this is going to go up. In the first year, it's going to go up by only a few cents, but this is a tax that goes up every single year. And by 2020, this will have gone up by 9.51% and will have basically doubled the GST. And then it continues to go up into eternity.
Is that right?
There's literally a stop.
Right?
Well, the thing that Tim isn't telling you is that our incomes rise over time as well. At the moment,
no, this is irrespective of inflation. This is actually just the tax effect. You'll have a second GST on basic grocery items as a consequence of a carbon tax, and it continues to go up
just
every
to respond
year.
to that, just to give a very clear response to that, as the carbon price rises, and it will only rise for the first 3 years before we move to an emissions trading scheme, then what we will see is household assistance rising as well. I'm sure that that's the plan that will be announced this afternoon.
Going up to match.
Because that's the way it works. But once we move to an emissions trading scheme, Tim will tell you the price will go through the roof. But the reality is this is completely dependent on international action because it will be a market mechanism.
Well, I mean, that is just rubbish. What happens in an emissions trading scheme is you allocate a certain number of permits. Then you draw down the number of permits to continue the price going up. The simple reality is if you want to go to a low-carbon future, the price of the carbon tax has to go up to at least $44 per tonne by 2020 and will continue to go up as a consequence after that to get to that point where we transition from coal to gas. So it needs to go up more than 100% by 2020 and continue to go up, and you just draw out the permits to keep the price continually going up. And the idea that we can trust this government to continue the compensation after they said there wouldn't be a carbon tax in the first place. Look, I don't know if the most of mainstream Australia would actually accept that compensation is going to continue to go up when you actually have to drive the price mechanism down to the consumer.
Right, I want to get Simon's response to that.
So what Tim ignores there is offsets, as permits rather, that you can go and you can there are other ways, there are cheaper ways of trying to pay for your carbon pollution. But if his main argument relies on the fact that the government will put a plan on the table and we simply can't believe it, we should simply walk away from it. Well, what other choice do we have?
Well, and by the same token, can I jump in on that? The same goes for Tony Abbott. I mean, he has said that a carbon tax is the simplest way to get there. He's written an op-ed saying that we should pass an ETS before Copenhagen. He was a cabinet minister in John Howard's government that said it was going to introduce an ETS if elected in 2007, and he was a shadow cabinet minister in Brendan Nelson's regime, which was also supportive of an ETS. So both sides of politics, if you like, have a bit of a trust issue here, surely.
Well, bully for Tony Abbott. The the IPA has consistently opposed a carbon tax because we know will ultimately increase the price of Tim Tams and everything else.
But it's a two-horse race here, though. I mean, that's my point here. If you don't want a carbon tax, that's one thing. If you don't get a carbon tax, you're going to get direct action, which is billions of dollars going into the state deciding to pick winners, isn't it?
Well, it is, but so is also the direct action plan that is being put forward by the government. All of these renewable energy programs, whether it's MRET or anything else, is simply a form of direct action by the government. They're just trying not to draw attention to that fact. And that's one of the key elements of this carbon tax plan, is not only do you have a tax that continues to go up every year and replicate the GST, plus inflation, plus the GST price on household goods, but you're also going to see a massive growth in these direct action policies driven by the Greens, which are also going to continue to increase electricity prices, which are going to go up by somewhere in the vicinity of $150 next year alone as a consequence of a $23 carbon tax, and will continue to go up as the carbon tax increases.
Let me start with you, Simon, and then get a reaction from Tim. What is the merit of direct action versus a carbon tax leading to an ETS, not just with the 2020 timetable, but going further than that? I mean, is it a matter of one being better than the other if we're looking further on the horizon, which makes this a debate about whether you want climate change action or not in the long run?
It does, ultimately, because when we look at direct action, what we see is that we simply don't have the level of money that would be required to cut carbon pollution levels by what the science is telling us we need to do into the future. But in the government's approach, what we're hoping to see today is significant investment in clean energy, because what we've got to do is reduce the marginal abatement cost of these programs.
Nuclear power, though, I mean, for some reason on the left there never seems to be a willingness to embrace a debate about nuclear power.
And we should talk about it briefly, because we should talk about it briefly because
had an exclusive there.
because importantly, while in some countries that may be an economically efficient way to go, in Australia it's simply not. In Australia, whether or not we think that nuclear power is safe, and I think it's not, it actually doesn't make sense because of the huge size of our country. We need decentralised energy. We've got to move towards that type of energy.
But we're not even having a debate about whether what you say is accurate or not, because Labor isn't willing to have a quality debate about nuclear power. So we only have that debate on the fringes, with you saying that, people on the other side saying the opposite, that it can work in population centres around certain parts of the coast, like in Sydney. This is the problem, isn't it, is that the climate change debate seems to be held hostage on all sides to skeptics and deniers on one hand, but then activists for climate change not being willing to be open-minded about a free debate which might include nuclear power.
Well, I think we are open to having the debate. I mean, you'll never see me shying away from having that debate. What's important here is that the best energy sources for Australia are renewable energy sources. I mean, more sun falls on this earth in one day than is required to power the earth for 1 year. I mean, we have such great opportunity to have endless energy sources. That's why we're having the debate about clean energy or staying in the future, staying in the present.
Tim, your response to that?
Well, that's exactly the point. Renewable energy can deliver some modest benefits in terms of the providing electricity to the grid, but what we actually need is baseload power, and that's why nuclear energy needs to be part of the discussion.
And renewables will give us baseload.
But no, renewables
let's
won't
just
give us.
make sure we're very clear about that.
It's absolutely
not
true.
certain.
We will not get renewable baseload from this country in things like geothermal. You only need to look at the constant reports and the sliding share price of geothermal to see exactly how much it won't be able to drive that transition. The same is with solar thermal. All of these technologies will not work to deliver baseload power. The only way you'll get there is to continue to increase the price of the carbon tax to get to a point where you can have gas replace coal, or you can see it go up, continue to nuclear power, which is a very significant price. If you want to get to baseload solar thermal, which cannot deliver baseload, but try, you would have to have a carbon tax of $236 per tonne.
All right, well, I'm going to have to leave that as a comment, sorry, because I do have a question in the time we've got left for you, Simon. We're sitting on couches, a little bit like a therapy session. How do you feel about the realities of how this debate has shifted? Yourselves at Get Up, the Greens opposed in large part Kevin Rudd's version of an ETS because it didn't go far enough. Now, you're in a situation now where you are supporting a more moderate scheme by Julia Gillard compared to what Kevin Rudd offered, even compared to what John Howard took to the 07 election as part of the Shergold report. This is a more modest scheme. It isn't as active towards action on climate change, but do you regret, I guess what I'm asking is, do you regret not having been perhaps more pragmatic back then when the consensus on climate change is greater than it is now?
So by the end of the day, I think that when you look at the details, what you will see energy is in fact something that is far more environmentally strong than the CPRS. And you should look at the following things when you're trying to make this assessment. First of all, how much money will actually go into R&D, innovation and the scaling up of renewable energy, because that's how we reduce the marginal abatement costs. That's how we prepare ourselves for the future. Secondly, how long will the compensation actually last for the coal sector, for any other special interest sectors that are going to receive benefits today, in addition to...
Gillard won't like these sort of comments, because this sounds to me like you're expecting the carbon tax to be stronger for the environmental action that Gillard is after than a lot of people think. But Gillard will be worried that will come across...
Sure, and that's not my problem.
No,
but when we talk about credibility of the scheme, we've got to be able to transition to clean energy as quickly as we can. So we should be looking today at how long the compensation lasts for emissions-intensive trade exposed. How quickly can we get to the Garno model, which actually prices, which actually puts in place a compensation scheme that is directly correlated with the trade exposure, as opposed to this random allocation of money to areas which we believe don't actually need it. If we take a look at those details today, and we should do that over the coming hours, I'm sure that what we will see is a scheme that is more credible.
Tim, your response?
In short, I mean, in many ways, Simon's right about the massive amount of money that's going to go to big business as a consequence of this. This is a classic example of what happens when you get big business and big government in the room. They screw the householders, and that's what's going to happen under this scheme with an ever-increasing...
Today, the households have one today.
No, they haven't one today. They're only getting a price to offset, to compensate for the flow-through costs of the carbon tax, and the carbon tax price will continue to flow through as it increases every year. And if you also are optimistic...
That will only happen, Tim, in fairness. That will only happen if there is a political capacity for it to happen, surely. I mean, I can't see governments of any political persuasion putting the carbon tax up at too high a rate, at a rate that you might prefer, Simon, if they don't think that they can do it politically year on year.
Well, that's fine, but then that will fundamentally undermine any transition to a low-carbon future. If you need to get to a minimum $44 price of a carbon tax, you will not get the outcome. The only way you'll get there, ironically, is through direct action, through the types of schemes like MRES. I'm not advocating that. I'm just saying the only way you're going to get there, the way you're going to get there is either increasing the carbon tax as fast as you can to get it to $44 per tonne minimum, or you are going to have to get it, direct action in place. And this is the part the Gillard government doesn't want to talk about, which is all of their direct action component, because it's going to have to supplement the carbon tax because they're not prepared to increase it fast enough.
There's just one fact that undermines this, and that is, any economist will be able to tell you this, that as you invest in new initiatives, as you invest in research and development, as you invest in the economies of scale, the marginal cost of each unit of clean energy declines. That's how we move to a clean energy economy.
But we also need to base it on today's prices and look at long-term projections, and all of that is part of it. You still need to get to a carbon tax of about $44 a tonne to switch from coal to gas. It needs to be $49 for the government to get anywhere meeting its 5% emissions reduction target by 2020.
All right, we're out of time, but gentlemen, you're going to be back here on Sky News this afternoon debating this issue once we know a little bit more after the lock-up's finished and we've heard from the Prime Minister and the opposition leader. Simon Sheikh from Get Up, thanks for your company. Same to you, Tim Wilson from the Institute of Public Affairs. And stay tuned. We're about to